Those that know me well will know that among many things, two that I absolutely adore are film and Spider-Man. In any medium, the story of a regular, realistic guy trying to nobly find himself, do the right thing, and make it through the most mundane personal crises amidst such impossible circumstances is captivating enough. I just love that mix of drama, action and playful comedic relief. But let's face it, if there were ever a property designed for the big screen, it's Spider-Man. And when filmmakers have managed to prove that and capture that idea through their own cinematic visions, it really feels like the culmination of the character's 50 plus years of existence. What's interesting now, however, is that Spider-Man in media has taken something of a bizarre shape the past couple of years. Live action movies, an open world video game, a theatrically released animated film, all with their own unique styles and focuses, expanding and altering the material as they see fit. See also the dozens of TV series they've managed to squeeze out of the character within the last 10 or so years. What was once established Spider-Man lore has essentially been thrown out the window. Aunt May can be young, Gwen Stacy can be a character, Harry Osborn can be Venom, Spider-Man can be a woman, a black Hispanic teenager, a Japanese American, a pig? I mean, anything is possible at this point. Even the fandom, which once seemed like a small selection of innocents, has gained its own giant imposing identity, and with any large fandom comes its own portion of utter psychos, causing upset to the entertainment industry so large that we now all have to explain that while we enjoy Spider-Man, we're not quite the same weirdos that threatened Insomniac Games, or gave our money to a sketchy fundraiser project to produce a fan-made Spider-Man 4, without Sam Raimi as well, so what would even be the point? With all of this in mind, there's been a recent democratic push to embrace all versions of the property, good or bad, just to shut people up. And there is certainly something to be said for that. What resonates with you about a version of Spider-Man may not with me, and that's fine. At this rate, there are so many to choose from, it's hard to be bothered by any that don't suit your fancy. This being said, however, there is such a thing as taking this idea a little bit too far. This is going to feed into our main discussion today. Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was one of the best films released last year. An audacious, brilliantly written shock of a thing compared to the straight-to-DVD fodder we all assumed it'd be from its initial announcement. Expertly juggling a multi-layered parallel universe ensemble adventure with a small intimate character study of an average teenager, directors Bob Persichetti, Rodney Rothman and Peter Ramsey have created a genuinely excellent piece of movie making that uses everything and the kitchen sink to create a sprawling, captivating and imaginative experience that's bound to spawn an entire new generation of exciting animators. The film is earnest with its likeable and at times ambiguous characters. It operates like a well-oiled machine, quite frankly, in the story department, with its tight script and attention to narrative detail. Its clever dialogue and funny circumstances are punctuated by its tremendous voice cast. It's got genuine threat and tension, a kinetic pace that never drags, a truly pioneering visual art style and motion technique, the likes of which we haven't seen in commercial Western animation in ages. And it also just happens to be a great Spider-Man story. And I probably don't even have to tell you all of this, its Oscar win just the other week speaks perfectly well for itself. But as established, with Spider-Man now it seems, the train never stops. Just recently, audiences were greeted by the trailer to Spider-Man Far From Home, the sequel to Spider-Man Homecoming and the direct follow-up to Avengers Endgame. After it went out, the trailer, perhaps expectedly, started to receive some backlash from a portion of its audience, and it didn't take long for the other end of the spectrum to start arguing in the movie's favour, many employing SpiderVerse as a positive example of this controversial element being made to work well. To clarify, people don't seem all that excited that Marissa Tomei's Aunt May, after discovering her nephew's secret identity at the end of Homecoming, appears to now be in complete support of Peter's alter ego. Fans are naturally worried about this. Me, I'm pretty indifferent to be honest. Part of it comes down to the fact that we don't actually know what the story purpose is of this decision. I can imagine a lot of it will depend on what goes down in the next Avengers movie that's set to precede all of this. But also, let's be honest, these filmmakers know exactly what they want this Spider-Man series to be, right? Harmless, easy to enjoy fluff with a likeable lead that can subsequently facilitate Marvel Universe cameos as per the contractual agreement between studios. If that means that they now also want to add the ease of Peter not having to hide his secret identity from his aunt anymore, because then it's just more problems for the character and that's just not the direction they want to go in, fine, whatever. It's not really a take that I care for, but again, complaining about one version of Spider-Man these days is almost like an embarrassment of riches. Plus, that creative decision is clearly working out for them. People really love this version of the property. So while I understand this concern on the part of the fans, I'm also not all that surprised that they're doing it. On the opposing end, however, many in favour of the decision have been arguing that those upset don't really have a leg to stand on if they accepted the same idea in Into the Spider-Verse, that Aunt May knew of Peter's alter ego and it worked perfectly fine there. Upon hearing this, I thought it would be a good time for a discussion regarding specifically Peter Parker in Into the Spider-Verse. For those that haven't seen the film, while the story follows Miles Morales as a down-on-his-luck teenager from Brooklyn struggling to channel his creative aspirations, and who eventually develops Spider-Man powers before stumbling into a parallel dimensions plot and finding himself under the mentorship of an alternate universe Peter Parker voiced by Jake Johnson, the film itself actually opens to a prologue narrated by another Peter Parker, the one of Miles' universe, voiced by Chris Pine. So the film in fact features two different versions of the character. In this prologue, the Peter Parker of Miles' world, aged somewhere in his early 20s, gives us a general comprehensive rundown of his life as Spider-Man up to this point. Specifically that he's been doing his thing for 10 years now, and in that time he's fallen in love, continued to successfully protect the city time and again, and that it's led him to a very happy place. He even says at one point that he loves being Spider-Man. The next time we see the character is perhaps 20 minutes later, when Miles accidentally happens upon a fight between him and this universe's Green Goblin over a machine that the Kingpin is using to tap into other dimensions. After Peter and Miles acquaint themselves, not much beyond acknowledging that they have similar abilities and that Spidey can help Miles with a bit of training after this situation, Spider-Man is actually killed right before our eyes, Miles is included, murdered at the hands of Wilson Fisk. It's a viscerally shocking and upsetting thing to witness, especially given the demographic of kids most likely to experience it. It turns out though that during that battle, a bunch of other Spider people were pulled into this dimension, one of which being Peter B. Parker, who eventually tracks Miles down. Peter B. Parker, aged somewhere around his late 30s on the other hand, is going through something of a midlife crisis. As he recounts for us when we meet him, he's been doing the whole Spidey shtick for about 22 years, has gotten pretty tired of it all, and after Mary Jane divorcing him because he wasn't ready to take the next step, and Aunt May eventually dying, well, he's going through a pretty harsh depression. Constantly eating junk food, lounging around in his costume, which almost definitely needs a wash, and crying himself to sleep day and night. It's unclear which version of Peter Parker they were considering him for, but a lot of folks have expressed disappointment that Tobey Maguire wasn't contacted to voice him, which, according to the filmmakers, was a consideration at one point. While that initially does sound like a fun nostalgia trip, I actually think it's a good thing that they don't come out and say that either version is meant to explicitly represent any previous depictions found in other media. The reason? The central theme of Into the Spider-Verse is the idea that we all have it in us to be like Spider-Man, to be a hero. The film constantly calls attention to this in a number of ways, as it tries to snap Miles out of this preconceived notion that he needs to be like the other Spider people in order to successfully flourish as one. And one of the ways it does so is in its depiction of the Peter Parker that dies. Going back to Aunt May, when the characters go to visit her, now grieving over the death of her nephew, it's quickly revealed that not only did Aunt May know of Peter's true identity as Spider-Man in this universe long before he died, but that she even assisted in his crime-fighting life as a sort of Alfred to his Batman, an idea further cemented when we discover she operates out of what may as well be called the Spider Cave, with gadgets, alternate display suits, vehicles, and state-of-the-art tech and comms systems. And this is the element that folks have cited in defense of the trailer for Spider-Man Far From Home, that Aunt May knowing about Peter's dual life can and has been done well. While I get the point that people are trying to make, I also think this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the filmmakers were trying to say here. While the contrast between both versions of Peter is rather obvious, one is younger and very happy, the other older and very sad, the difference actually bears a certain thematic relevance that helps to tie the whole story together. Once Aunt May spells out to us her role in the first Peter Parker's life, the film has inferred a very notable thing, that what he was, essentially, was an idealised version of the character. He overcame his demons, successfully balanced both aspects of his double life, and it allowed him to grow into a respectable and optimistic young adult who wasn't turned away by his loved ones and peers and even had help from them. He basically figured everything out in life. The Peter Parker of Miles' dimension was actually kind of perfect. Too perfect, in fact. And that's the point. A Spider-Man without much to learn anymore, and by extension a Spider-Man without any problems, is a Spider-Man that you can't tell many stories with, because it's not as engaging and it's not very interesting. And while what little we get of him is exciting stuff and he seems like a really cool dude, the Peter Parker of Miles' dimension functions as a thematic statement before a fully fledged character. The film uses his perfection to show us that what makes Spider-Man a compelling character are his flaws and his mundane every person struggles to get by in life. An idea the movie quite literally beats into its audience by killing him off the moment he served his purpose for the new protagonist. His story is over, and Miles, who does have a lot to learn, his is just getting started. The film's own visual style is itself another externalization of this idea. The artists and animators have used a technique called chromatic aberration, which sees a separation in colour tones the further out of focus an object becomes, not only to visually call back to the faulty printing process of cheaply produced comic book magazines of the 60s, but to again recall the theme of perfection. That misalignment in the colours is just another celebration of difference, the weird, the wonderful, and the imperfect. It represents Miles' unique character, his imagination, his talents and perspective, the things that he sees as perhaps flaws, which he learns to fully embrace by the time we reach the climactic sequence. He designs and spray paints his own suit, his form of web swinging involves a lot more running and high altitude parkour than anything else, and there's even the implication by the end that he'll go on to pursue a career in the arts, a complete polar opposite to Peter's academia and science. Even the things as simple as Miles singing to himself to calm his nerves, or soaring through the air to an R&B track help to push this idea. It's the things that make Miles different that allow him to become a hero. As he says towards the end of the film, anyone can wear the mask. And as opposed to Peter teaching Miles everything like Miles had initially expected, the two instead learn from each other. Spider-Man is a coming-of-age story, and they both still have lots to learn. If they don't, well, that makes them kinda perfect. And that sucks, because a perfect Spider-Man is a Spider-Man that isn't, because none of us are. And that's why citing Aunt May's role in SpiderVerse as a positive example doesn't really work. Her involvement in making his life easier is a tool used to imply the very opposite. It's merely another element that plays into the film's thematic statement. A simple way of looking at it would be to imagine a scene between her and her Peter before he died, where they're on the same wavelength and working together or whatever. It probably wouldn't have been as interesting as the one we actually got between her and Peter B. Parker, finding solace in their shared grief. That's why the scene works. It's that dynamic, the circumstance that both characters, now suffering from losses and experiencing very human problems, find themselves in. Believe it or not, I did not make this editorial to dump all over the Spider-Man of the MCU. If I did, I'd actually put conservative effort into explaining how one-note and kind of sexist its portrayal of Aunt May has been so far, but I do think that this shows how easy it is to just give broad answers and draw the simplest of comparisons in the face of such a large, varied and heated zeitgeist. Yes, it's noisy out there, and yes, that can sometimes be overwhelming. But no, you don't have to like every version of the property that gets mass-produced your way, and context speaks wonders. Just because a thing works in and of itself does not mean that the same will be true surrounded by different elements. Film is a collaborative medium, several departments working together to tell one story, and to take something like this and remove it from all of that, as if all those other ingredients didn't contribute to making it work as well as it does, is not giving this medium enough credit. And if I were to argue in Far From Home's favour, I would not cite the version of Spider-Man used to explain how Spider-Man should not be like this. Cheers for watching everyone, this was a really fun one to do. If you agree with this editorial, please feel free to comment below, share it amongst your friends, shove it in anyone's face who keeps saying that the first Peter Parker in SpiderVerse is the best, and as always, if you like this video, you can subscribe to the channel for more. Thank you.